What if the reason people overlook you has nothing to do with your appearance, your intelligence, or your personality? What if the very thing you've been doing your entire life to gain acceptance is the exact thing destroying your natural magnetism? Carl Jung believed that the more you seek approval, the further you move away from your true self. And what happens when you finally stop seeking it is something most people never experience. Stay until the end, because the final insight may completely change how you see yourself and why some people seem effortlessly magnetic while others spend a lifetime trying to be noticed. But this is where Jung's most uncomfortable observation enters the picture. And what happens next is the part most people never understand. The strange thing is that your mind is doing this without you realizing it. But before you can change that, you need to understand something Jung considered dangerous. The final piece of this puzzle is perhaps the most transformative of all. In a moment, I'll show you the one sign that proves you're no longer living for approval, and when that happens, people begin responding to you differently without knowing why. What if the reason you feel unseen has nothing to do with your appearance, your intelligence, your success, or even your personality? What if the very thing you've spent years trying to perfect is the exact thing that is weakening your presence? Most people believe that being liked creates influence. Carl Jung believed something very different. He understood that the more a person depends on approval, the more they become separated from their authentic nature. And the more separated they become from their authentic nature, the weaker their psychological presence becomes. This is why some people can enter a room and immediately capture attention without speaking, and others can spend years trying to impress everyone around them, yet remain invisible. The difference is not confidence. The difference is not charisma. The difference is not beauty. The difference is psychological freedom. And by the end of this video, you will understand why freedom from approval is one of the most magnetic qualities a human being can possess. But first, we need to examine a question that most people never ask. Why do we seek approval in the first place? Because approval feels like safety. From childhood, we learn a simple lesson. When people approve of us, we feel accepted. When people reject us, we feel threatened. As children, this mechanism serves an important purpose. Acceptance helps us survive. Belonging protects us. Love nurtures us. But something strange happens as we grow older. The survival strategy that once protected us begins to control us. Without realizing it, we start building our identity around the expectations of others. We learn what makes people smile. We learn what earns praise. We learn what avoids criticism. And slowly, almost invisibly, we begin abandoning parts of ourselves, not because we want to, but because we want acceptance. Jung called this process the development of the persona. The persona is the mask we wear for the world. It is the version of ourselves designed to be accepted, the version that knows how to behave, the version that knows what to say, the version that knows how to fit in. The problem is not that the persona exists. The problem begins when we mistake the persona for who we truly are. Because every mask has a cost. Every role demands a sacrifice. Every attempt to please requires the suppression of something authentic. And what is suppressed does not disappear. According to Jung, it sinks into the unconscious, into what he called the shadow. The shadow contains everything we hide: our fears, our anger, our desires, our ambitions, our uniqueness, even our strength. Many people assume the shadow contains only negative qualities, but Jung warned that some of our greatest gifts are hidden there as well. Think about that. The version of yourself that seeks approval may not only be hiding your flaws, it may be hiding your power, and this creates a strange psychological tension. On the surface, you appear agreeable, but beneath the surface, another part of you wants freedom. On the surface, you try to avoid conflict, but beneath the surface, another part of you wants authenticity. On the surface, you try to be what everyone expects, but beneath the surface, another part of you desperately wants to be real. This conflict drains energy, and people feel it, not consciously, but instinctively, because human beings are extraordinarily sensitive to incongruence. We may not know exactly what feels off about someone, but we notice when a person is disconnected from themselves. We notice when someone is trying too hard. We notice when someone needs validation. We notice when someone is performing. And ironically, the harder someone tries to gain approval, the more approval slips away. Why? Because approval seeking communicates uncertainty. It silently says, please tell me I'm enough. And nothing weakens presence faster than asking others to define your worth. Now compare that to someone who no longer needs constant validation. Notice how different their energy feels. They listen differently. They speak differently. They move differently. They don't seem rushed. They don't seem desperate. They don't seem concerned with proving themselves. And because they are not chasing approval, people naturally become curious about them. This is the paradox Jung understood. The moment you stop needing acceptance from everyone, you become far more attractive to everyone. Not because you are trying to attract attention, but because your attention is no longer trapped by the need for validation. And this is where the journey truly begins. Because most people never realize they are living inside a prison. An invisible prison. A prison built from expectations. The expectations of family. The expectations of society. The expectations of friends. The expectations of partners. The expectations of strangers. And perhaps most importantly, the expectations they have imposed upon themselves. The walls of this prison are not physical. They are psychological. They exist inside thoughts like, what will people think? What if they don't like me? What if I disappoint someone? What if I fail? What if they reject me? These questions appear harmless, but over time they become chains. They dictate decisions. They influence behavior. They shape identity. And eventually, they determine destiny. Jung believed that one of the greatest tragedies of life is reaching old age only to discover you lived according to someone else's script. You followed expectations. You obeyed approval, you adapted, you performed, you pleased, but you never truly became yourself. And that realization can be devastating, because deep inside, every human being longs for authenticity, not perfection, not popularity, authenticity. The soul does not desire applause. The soul desires wholeness. The soul desires truth. The soul desires integration. This is why approval can never fully satisfy you, even when you receive it, even when people praise you, even when people admire you, even when people validate you. The relief never lasts, because external approval can never solve an internal disconnection. Only authenticity can do that. And this leads us to one of Jung's most powerful insights. The people who become truly magnetic are not those who learn how to attract attention. They are those who stop abandoning themselves. Because every time you choose authenticity over approval, something remarkable happens. You recover energy. You recover confidence. You recover clarity. You recover presence. And perhaps for the first time in your life, you begin standing on your own psychological ground. But there is something even more important. Something most people never understand. Because when you stop seeking approval, you will face a challenge that terrifies almost everyone. And it is this challenge that separates ordinary lives from extraordinary ones. In the next part, we will explore the hidden fear that keeps people trapped in approval seeking for decades, and why confronting that fear may be the most liberating decision you will ever make. There is a reason most people never escape the need for approval. And it is not weakness. It is fear. A fear so deep that many never recognize it. Because beneath the desire to be liked, beneath the need for validation, beneath the urge to explain yourself, there exists a much older fear. The fear of rejection. For most people, rejection feels far more painful than it should. A simple disagreement can feel like a personal attack. A criticism can feel devastating. Being ignored can ruin an entire day. And being misunderstood can create anxiety that lasts for weeks. Why? Because the unconscious mind often interprets rejection as a threat to survival, even when no real danger exists. This ancient mechanism once protected our ancestors. Thousands of years ago, exclusion from the tribe could mean death. Human beings evolved to seek belonging, to seek connection, to seek acceptance. And while society has changed dramatically, the unconscious mind still carries traces of that ancient programming. This is why approval can become addictive. Every compliment feels rewarding. Every sign of acceptance creates relief. Every expression of admiration produces a temporary emotional high. But there is a hidden cost. The more dependent you become on approval, the less control you have over your emotional state. Think about that carefully. If your happiness depends on how others see you, then your happiness belongs to others. If your confidence depends on their validation, then your confidence belongs to others. If your identity depends on their acceptance, then your identity belongs to others. And when your identity belongs to others, you become psychologically fragile, because your sense of self can be shaken by any opinion, any criticism, any rejection, any misunderstanding. Jung saw this as one of the greatest obstacles to individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, because individuation requires something most people avoid. It requires the courage to disappoint people, not intentionally, not cruelly, but inevitably. Because the moment you begin living authentically, some people will no longer recognize you. The version of you they were comfortable with begins to disappear, and that can create resistance. Perhaps you've already experienced this. Maybe you've started setting boundaries. Maybe you've begun speaking more honestly. Maybe you've stopped over-explaining yourself. Maybe you've stopped trying to please everyone. And suddenly, people reacted differently. Some became uncomfortable, some became distant, some accused you of changing. What they often mean is this: you are no longer behaving in a way that benefits my expectations. And this creates an important question. Are you willing to lose approval in order to gain yourself? Because every authentic life eventually arrives at this crossroads. One path leads toward acceptance. The other leads toward freedom. Most choose acceptance, not because it fulfills them, but because it feels safer. Yet there is something profoundly liberating that happens when you stop organizing your life around the opinions of others. You begin discovering who you are beneath the performance. And that discovery changes everything. For years, many people live as actors. They adapt their personality depending on the audience. One version appears at work. Another appears with friends. Another appears online. Another appears in relationships. And after enough years of performing, they no longer know which version is real. This creates exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, psychological exhaustion. Because maintaining a false self requires enormous energy. Every conversation becomes management. Every interaction becomes strategy. Every decision becomes negotiation. Instead of simply being, you are constantly calculating. How should I act? What should I say? How will they react? What impression am I making? The mind never rests, the soul never relaxes, and the body carries the burden. This is why approval seeking often produces anxiety. The nervous system remains trapped in vigilance, always scanning, always adapting, always anticipating judgment, always preparing for rejection. But something remarkable happens when you begin releasing this pattern. At first, it feels uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, because silence feels risky. Boundaries feel selfish. Authenticity feels dangerous. And honesty feels exposed. You may even wonder whether you are making a mistake. This is normal. Because growth often feels like loss before it feels like freedom. You are not losing yourself. You are losing the mask. And masks rarely disappear without resistance. The ego fears uncertainty. The ego fears disapproval. The ego fears rejection. But the deeper self seeks something else: truth, wholeness, integration, freedom. Jung believed that psychological growth requires a confrontation with fear, not avoidance, not suppression, confrontation. And one of the most transformative fears you can confront is the fear of being disliked. Imagine how much energy becomes available when you stop trying to control other people's opinions. Imagine how much peace becomes possible when you stop trying to manage everyone's perception of you. Imagine how much freedom emerges when you no longer need universal approval. Because the truth is this: no matter how kind you are, someone will misunderstand you. No matter how honest you are, someone will doubt you. No matter how generous you are, someone will criticize you. No matter how authentic you are, someone will dislike you. This is not failure. This is reality. The attempt to be universally accepted is one of the most exhausting illusions a person can pursue. And the day you abandon that illusion, your energy begins returning to you. Suddenly, conversations become simpler. You stop defending every choice. You stop explaining every decision. You stop seeking permission to exist. And with that comes a surprising transformation. People begin responding to you differently, not because you became louder, not because you became more attractive, not because you learned a secret technique, but because your energy changed. There is something inherently compelling about a person who is comfortable being themselves, someone who does not desperately need agreement, someone who can tolerate misunderstanding, someone who remains grounded in their own values. Such people communicate strength without saying a word, and strength attracts attention. Not aggressive strength, not dominance, not arrogance. Inner strength, the kind that comes from self-possession, the kind that comes from emotional independence, the kind that comes from knowing who you are. Jung understood that true power is not power over others. It is power over yourself, the ability to remain centered when criticized, the ability to remain calm when rejected, the ability to remain authentic when pressured. This is the beginning of magnetism, not because people admire perfection, but because people are drawn to authenticity. Most individuals spend their lives unconsciously searching for someone who feels real, someone who is not pretending, someone who is not performing, someone who is not hiding behind endless masks. And when they encounter such a person, they feel it immediately. Perhaps they cannot explain it. Perhaps they cannot define it. But they sense it. Because authenticity has a frequency that performance cannot imitate. And this leads us to a deeper realization. The reason approval-seeking weakens your presence is because it divides your attention. Part of your awareness remains focused on yourself, on how you appear, how you sound, how you are being perceived. But when you stop seeking approval, that energy becomes available. You become more present, more attentive, more observant, more alive. And presence is one of the rarest qualities in the modern world. Most people are physically present but psychologically absent, lost in thoughts, lost in worries, lost in self-consciousness, lost in endless internal dialogue. But truly, magnetic people possess a different quality. They are here, fully here. And because they are fully here, others feel seen around them. And that feeling is unforgettable. But there is still a hidden obstacle standing between you and that level of presence. An obstacle Jung believed was responsible for much of human suffering. It is the shadow itself, the part of yourself you have spent years hiding. And what happens when you finally face that hidden part may be the most transformative moment of your life, because the greatest source of magnetism is not confidence, it is integration. And in the next part, we will explore why the qualities you have rejected within yourself may be the very qualities capable of transforming your presence forever. At this point, you may be wondering something important. If seeking approval weakens our presence, if authenticity strengthens it, then why is authenticity so difficult? Why do so many intelligent, self-aware people continue hiding parts of themselves? Carl Jung believed the answer lies in a psychological force that most people never fully understand. The shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is not darkness in the way most people imagine. The shadow is simply everything you have learned not to be, every trait you rejected, every emotion you suppressed, every desire you denied, every aspect of yourself that seemed unacceptable. Over time, these rejected parts do not disappear. They move underground, into the unconscious, and from there, they continue influencing your life, quietly, powerfully, often without your awareness. This is one of Jung's most profound discoveries. What remains unconscious does not stop operating. It simply operates from the shadows. And this creates a fascinating paradox. Many people spend years trying to become more confident, more attractive, more influential, more magnetic. Yet the very qualities they seek may already exist within them, buried inside the shadow. Think about it. A child who is naturally bold may be told, "Don't be so loud." A child who is naturally assertive may hear, "Stop being difficult." A child who is naturally expressive may be criticized for being dramatic. A child who is naturally independent may be called selfish. Eventually, the child learns a lesson. To be accepted, Certain parts must be hidden, and so they are. The boldness disappears, the assertiveness disappears, the independence disappears, at least on the surface. But deep inside, those qualities remain alive, waiting. And what often appears as insecurity in adulthood is not a lack of strength. It is strength that has been buried. This changes everything, because it means your transformation does not require becoming someone new. It requires recovering what was lost. The confidence you admire in others, the courage you admire in others, the authenticity you admire in others, often reflects qualities that already exist within you, qualities your unconscious wants you to reclaim. This is why Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Most people believe their limitations are permanent. Jung believed many limitations are unconscious. And what is unconscious can become conscious. What is hidden can be integrated. What is rejected can be reclaimed. Now here is where the conversation becomes deeply personal, because every human being has a shadow, including you. Some people hide their anger. Some hide their ambition. Some hide their intelligence. Some hide their sensitivity. Some hide their creativity. Some hide their power. The specific content differs from person to person, but the mechanism remains the same. The fear of rejection creates self-rejection, and self-rejection creates fragmentation. You become divided against yourself. One part seeks approval, another part seeks freedom. One part wants safety, another part wants expression. One part wants belonging, another part wants authenticity. This internal conflict consumes energy, and people feel that conflict. Not because they know your history, not because they know your psychology, but because the human nervous system is remarkably sensitive. When someone is divided inside, their energy feels divided outside. When someone is hiding from themselves, their presence feels incomplete. But when someone begins integrating their shadow, everything changes. Their voice changes. Their posture changes. Their decisions change. Their relationships change. Even their silence changes. Because there is less internal resistance, less suppression, less pretending, less fear. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack every day for years. Eventually, you become accustomed to the weight. You forget what it feels like to move freely. Then one day, someone removes the backpack. Suddenly, everything feels lighter. That is what shadow integration often feels like. Not becoming more, but carrying less. Less shame, less fear, less self-rejection, less dependence on external validation. And as these burdens disappear, your natural presence emerges. This is one reason magnetic people often seem relaxed. Not because life is easier for them, but because they are no longer fighting themselves. Their energy is unified, their thoughts align with their actions, their values align with their behavior, their inner world aligns with their outer world, and that alignment creates power. A quiet power, a subtle power, a power that cannot be faked. Because true magnetism is not performance, it is coherence. The feeling that a person is fully connected to themselves. Now here is something most people never realize. The qualities you admire most in others often point directly toward your shadow. Think about the people who fascinate you, the people who inspire you, the people who command your attention. What qualities do they possess? Confidence, freedom, creativity, boldness, authenticity? Notice your answer carefully, because those qualities may not simply be traits you admire. They may be aspects of yourself seeking expression. Jung called this projection. We project unconscious qualities onto others. We see in them what we have not yet recognized within ourselves. This explains why certain individuals affect us so deeply. They awaken something, not because they possess magic, but because they reflect a forgotten part of us. And this realization can be life-changing, because it shifts the focus. Instead of asking, "How can I become like them?" you begin asking, "What part of myself have I abandoned?" That question opens a door into self-discovery, a door into healing, a door into personal power, and most importantly, a door into authenticity. The path is not always comfortable. In fact, it rarely is, because the shadow contains everything you have spent years avoiding. old fears, old wounds, old insecurities, old beliefs. To integrate the shadow means meeting these parts with awareness rather than judgment. It means acknowledging your anger without becoming it, acknowledging your fear without obeying it, acknowledging your desire without being controlled by it, acknowledging your power without abusing it. This process creates wholeness, and wholeness creates magnetism. Not the superficial kind, not the kind based on appearance, not the kind based on manipulation, but something deeper, something more lasting. The magnetism of a person who knows who they are. The magnetism of a person who no longer needs to hide. The magnetism of a person who has made peace with themselves. People often ask why certain individuals seem unforgettable, why their presence lingers, why their energy remains in your mind long after they leave the room. The answer is rarely beauty, rarely status, rarely talent. More often, it is authenticity. Because authenticity creates emotional impact, and emotional impact creates memory. You forget many faces, you forget many conversations, but you rarely forget someone who made you feel deeply seen, someone who felt genuinely real, someone who carried an unusual sense of inner alignment. That is the effect of integration. And yet there is another layer, a deeper level of transformation that Jung believed every person must eventually confront. Because recovering your hidden qualities is only the beginning. The next challenge is learning how to trust them, how to live from them, how to stop asking the world for permission to be yourself. And this is where true individuation begins. Because becoming magnetic is not about attracting others. It is about becoming so aligned with your authentic nature that your presence naturally influences everyone around you. In the next part, we will explore the moment when a person stops living according to expectations and begins living according to their deepest truth. And that is where the most powerful transformation of all begins. There comes a moment in every meaningful transformation when something unexpected happens. You stop waiting, not for success, not for opportunity, not for certainty. You stop waiting for permission. For most of their lives, many people unconsciously wait for someone to authorize their existence, someone to tell them they are good enough, smart enough, talented enough, attractive enough, worthy enough. They wait for a parent, a partner, a boss, an audience, society, or perhaps even strangers on the internet. Without realizing it, they hand over the authority of their lives, and as long as someone else holds that authority, freedom remains impossible. This is why Carl Jung considered individuation one of the most courageous journeys a person can undertake. Because individuation is not self-improvement, it is self-discovery. It is the process of becoming who you were always meant to be beneath the conditioning, beneath the expectations, beneath the masks. And this process requires a difficult realization. Not everyone will understand your transformation. In fact, some people may resist it. Because every relationship contains unconscious agreements, unspoken expectations, invisible roles, patterns that have developed over time. When you begin changing, those patterns are disrupted. The people around you may not consciously understand what is happening, but they feel it. The version of you they expected is disappearing, and that can create discomfort. Perhaps you've experienced this already. Maybe you've become more honest, more direct, more authentic, more independent. And suddenly people started saying things like, "You've changed. You used to be different. What happened to you?" Sometimes these statements are observations. Sometimes they are invitations to return to your old role, the role that made others comfortable, the role that required you to shrink yourself, the role that earned approval at the cost of authenticity. This is one of the greatest tests on the path of individuation. Can you remain true to yourself when others prefer the old version of you? Can you maintain your center when people misunderstand your growth? Can you continue evolving without needing universal agreement? Because here is a truth that many people spend decades avoiding. Growth often disappoints people, not because growth is wrong, but because growth changes dynamics. A person who learns boundaries is no longer easy to manipulate. A person who develops self-respect is no longer willing to accept mistreatment. A person who discovers their voice is no longer willing to remain silent. And these changes can challenge those who benefited from the old version. This does not mean you become cold, or selfish, or disconnected. Quite the opposite. Authenticity often creates deeper relationships, healthier relationships, more meaningful relationships. But it also reveals which connections were based on genuine love and which were based on convenience. And that revelation can be uncomfortable, yet it is necessary. Because true magnetism does not emerge from pleasing everyone. It emerges from alignment. Imagine a tree growing in a forest. It does not ask permission to reach toward the sun. It does not apologize for becoming taller. It does not seek approval from the surrounding trees. It simply grows according to its nature. Human beings are no different. The soul naturally seeks expansion, growth, expression, purpose. But fear often interrupts this process. Fear says, stay small, stay safe, stay predictable, stay acceptable. And for a while, many people obey. Until one day, something inside them becomes impossible to ignore. A quiet voice, a persistent feeling, an inner knowing, the realization that they can no longer betray themselves. Jung believed this voice comes from the deeper self, the organizing center of the psyche, the part of you that knows who you are beyond roles and expectations, the part of you that continually calls you toward wholeness. Many people hear this voice but ignore it. Some hear it and become frightened. Others hear it and begin the journey. And that journey changes everything. Because once you start living from the self rather than from approval, your relationship with life transforms. You stop asking, what do people want from me? And begin asking, what is life asking of me? You stop asking, how can I fit in? And begin asking, how can I express what is true? You stop asking, what will they think? And begin asking, what do I believe? These questions seem simple, but they are revolutionary because they shift the center of gravity from the outside world to the inside world, and wherever your attention goes, your energy follows. This is one reason authentic people feel powerful, not because they control others, but because they are no longer controlled by others. Their attention is not constantly trapped in external validation. Their energy is not consumed by impression management. Their identity is not dependent upon approval. As a result, they become remarkably present, and presence is one of the rarest forms of power. Think about the last time you spoke with someone who was completely present, someone who wasn't distracted, someone who wasn't performing, someone who wasn't trying to impress you. How did it feel? Most likely, it felt refreshing, grounding, memorable. Why? Because true presence communicates something profound. It communicates that a person is comfortable with themselves. And comfort with oneself is contagious. People relax around authenticity. They trust it. They feel drawn toward it, not because it is flashy, but because it is rare. Most people are trapped in self-consciousness. Authentic individuals are liberated from much of that burden, and the difference is noticeable. Now here is where things become even more interesting. Because the moment you stop chasing approval, you begin attracting something far more valuable. Respect. Approval is often temporary. Respect is enduring. Approval depends on pleasing others. Respect emerges from integrity. Approval fluctuates. Respect deepens. Approval asks, do they like me? Respect asks, am I being true to myself? This distinction changes everything. Because people may disagree with an authentic person. They may challenge them. They may even dislike them. But they often respect them. Why? Because authenticity signals strength, not physical strength, not dominance, psychological strength. The strength to stand alone when necessary. The strength to hold your values under pressure. The strength to remain genuine in a world that rewards performance. And nothing creates magnetism more consistently than genuine self-respect. Because self-respect changes how you walk, how you speak, how you listen, how you set boundaries, how you make decisions, how you love, how you lead. Everything changes. You no longer operate from scarcity. You no longer operate from fear. You no longer operate from desperation. Instead, you begin operating from fullness. And people feel the difference immediately. They may not understand it intellectually, but emotionally, they feel it. The nervous system recognizes congruence. The unconscious recognizes integrity, and integrity creates trust. But there is still one final lesson, one final realization that transforms magnetism from a personal advantage into something much deeper. Because true magnetism is not about becoming more attractive. It is not about gaining influence. It is not about making people like you. It is about becoming a living example of what is possible when a human being stops abandoning themselves. And in the final part of this journey, we will discover why the most magnetic people are not those who seek attention, but those who become fully themselves. And that realization may change the way you see your entire life. There is a moment when a person stops trying to become impressive and becomes powerful. Not because they learned how to control people, not because they discovered a secret technique, not because they created a perfect image, but because they finally stopped fighting themselves. This is the final transformation, the movement from performance to presence, from seeking to being, from needing approval to becoming whole. Carl Jung spent much of his life studying one central question: what happens when a human being finally becomes themselves? Not the version shaped by society, not the version created by fear, not the version designed to receive validation. The real self, the deeper identity beneath the masks. And Jung believed that this journey was not only the path to psychological health, it was the path to becoming truly alive. Because a person who lives disconnected from themselves may achieve many things. They may become successful, they may become admired, they may become respected. But somewhere inside there remains a quiet emptiness, a feeling that something is missing. And often what is missing is not another achievement, not another compliment, not another person's approval. What is missing is the relationship with yourself. Because the deepest connection you will ever have is the one you create with your own inner world. And when that connection becomes strong, your entire presence changes. You no longer enter rooms asking, "Will they accept me?" You enter asking, "Am I present?" You no longer speak thinking, "How will this be received?" You speak from, "This is what is true." You no longer love from fear. You love from fullness. And this is where magnetism is born. Not the artificial kind, not the kind created by manipulation, but the kind that comes from a person who is internally aligned, a person who is no longer divided, a person who has made peace with their own complexity. Because humans are naturally drawn to wholeness. We are drawn to people who seem comfortable within themselves, people who do not need to prove every moment, people who can sit in silence without becoming uncomfortable, people who can express themselves without begging to be understood, people who can walk away without needing revenge, people who can love without losing themselves. This is rare, and what is rare becomes valuable. But there is something deeper. The most magnetic people are not magnetic because they have removed all imperfections. They are magnetic because they have accepted themselves completely. They are not hiding their humanity. They are not pretending to be flawless. They are integrated. They understand their darkness. They understand their fears. They understand their wounds. But they are not controlled by them. This is the difference between someone who is wounded and someone who is whole. A wounded person says, "I must hide this part of myself." A whole person says, "This is part of my story, but it does not define me." That acceptance creates freedom, and freedom creates presence. Now think about the people who have truly impacted your life, the ones you remember years later. What made them unforgettable? Was it only their appearance, their achievements, their words? Usually not. What remains is how they made you feel, their energy, their presence, the emotional experience of being around them. Maybe they listened in a way nobody else did. Maybe they made you feel seen. Maybe they carried a calmness that affected everyone around them. Maybe they had a depth you could sense but not explain. This is what Jung would describe as the expression of the self, the deeper organizing force within a person, the part that creates harmony between conscious and unconscious, between who you show the world and who you truly are. And when those two become aligned, something extraordinary happens. Your life stops feeling like a performance. You stop acting. You start living. And that change can be felt. This is why some people become more attractive as they become more authentic. Not because they changed their face, not because they changed their body, not because they mastered social tricks, but because they removed the inner resistance blocking their natural expression. A person who is constantly trying to be liked sends one message: please accept me. A person who accepts themselves sends another: I am here. The difference is enormous. The first asks, the second offers, and people are naturally drawn toward what feels complete. This does not mean becoming arrogant. It does not mean becoming careless about others. It does not mean ignoring kindness or compassion. True authenticity is not selfishness. True authenticity is responsibility. Responsibility for your emotions, your choices, your life, your energy. Because once you stop blaming the outside world for your inner state, you become powerful. You realize your peace is your responsibility. Your confidence is your responsibility. Your healing is your responsibility. Your transformation is your responsibility. And that realization changes everything. Now there is one final question. After everything we explored, how do you know you are actually becoming magnetic? How do you know you are no longer trapped in approval? The signs are subtle. You become comfortable with silence. You stop over-explaining. You stop chasing responses. You stop needing everyone to understand you. You stop changing yourself to avoid rejection. You become calmer, more centered, more intentional. You begin listening more deeply, speaking more carefully, choosing more consciously. You no longer react automatically. You respond. And that pause between reaction and response is where your freedom exists. That is where your power exists. Because a person who controls themselves does not need to control others. They have already found something much greater: inner authority. And this is perhaps the greatest lesson of all. The world is not changed by people who desperately seek to be seen. It is changed by people who become so aligned with themselves that their presence naturally creates impact. You do not become magnetic by chasing attention. You become magnetic by becoming whole. You do not become unforgettable by trying to impress others. You become unforgettable by being deeply yourself. You do not find your power by creating a stronger mask. You find your power by removing the mask. Because beneath all the roles, beneath all the expectations, beneath all the fears, there has always been something real, something authentic, something waiting to emerge: your true self. And perhaps the greatest discovery you will ever make is this: the person you have been trying to become was never outside of you. They were always within you, waiting. Now the question is, are you ready to stop living for approval and start living from truth? Because when you do, something changes. Your silence becomes stronger. Your presence becomes deeper. Your energy becomes clearer. And you no longer walk into the world asking to be chosen. You become someone who has already chosen themselves. If this message connected with something inside you, subscribe to The Kingdom Within. Here we explore Carl Jung, shadow work, consciousness, spirituality, and the journey of becoming who you truly are. And remember, the kingdom you are searching for is not outside of you. It has always been within.